You're listening to the People Agenda podcast, brought to you by leading HR, workforce and payroll transformation specialist, Lace Partners.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the What is a CPO podcast, a sub-series of our People Agenda podcast. Everyone knows what a Chief Financial Officer does. Most people can explain the role of a Chief Operating Officer, but what exactly a Chief People Officer does is very varied depending on the organisation's level of change of context, geography, etc. And in this podcast, we're speaking to CPOs from different organisations, industries and backgrounds to understand how they see the role and the challenges they face and the impact that they're making. And I'm thrilled today to be joined by David Jessop, Chief People Officer at the Charities Aid Foundation. David will bring a fascinating perspective from the charity sector where driving organisation performance and delivering social impact go hand in hand. So David, thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Debbie.
Lovely to see you. David, just tell us a bit about you and your role and the organisation you work in.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, I'm David Jessop. I'm Chief People Officer here at Charities Aid Foundation. We're a UK-based charity with activity through subsidiaries across North America, and that's in the not-for-profit space, civil society space, but also in the UK with a for-profit bank subsidiary, a financial services subsidiary.
So I remember when we first spoke, we thought that was a really interesting dynamic to have sort of that charity context, not-for-profit, and banking. So it would be interesting to explore a bit of that later on, for sure.
Yeah, and that really absolutely adds a really exciting and interesting dimension to the CPO and the people space, that I've sort of travelled here for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And it'd be great to sort of talk about it.
And what's your history prior to this role? What kind of industries have you worked in?
So I've been in the not-for-profit space for 25 years. So and predominantly large not-for-profits in the UK. Some that have had international remits, but mostly organisations that have had a UK wide remit. And I suppose most importantly, from my perspective, the last 15 years I've been in the C-suite, so in that executive space around the exec table, which has been an incredibly brilliant learning experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. We'll get into that for sure. So let's start with our killer question. We always start with the same question. To you, what is a Chief People Officer?
All right. In short, for me, a Chief People Officer is the role in an organisation that creates the conditions for people to succeed and perform brilliantly, because that essentially means that the people in an organisation are playing their part in delivering the organisation's purpose and driving success. I guess separate to that, but connected to it and separate in alignment is the context of my role also championing and influencing the people agenda at exec and non-exec level, so that it's seen in exactly the same equal way as the world of finance, the world of brand marketing, and certainly it's seen as a very, very pivotal partner in enabling the organisation to deliver its services to the world the world and the customers that are using it.
Yeah. So it'd be interesting just to unpack that second one a little bit in terms of, when we talk to CPOs who are in large multinational profit-making organisations, we talk a lot about, the ability to influence at the C-suite being largely around commercial terms and being able to drive value. And, is that different or the same for you? How do you get that influence around the C-suite table?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. And I've got colleagues who are, HR directors or CPOs in other organisations that some align behind that and others align, behind perhaps less influential remits. But certainly from my perspective, organisations succeed or fail by the doing. It's as simple as that. You can think and talk as much as you want, but ultimately what you're wanting in your organisation, unless you are a completely technology-enabled and delivery-based organisation, is that you are really wanting to create an environment in which the people who are delivering your services are engaged and motivated to really perform brilliantly and highly every day. They're doing your work and doing their work. And so for me, you have to be at the heart of the problem-solving, decision-making forum and table in the organisation, because if the exec team especially is not listening to the voices and the mood of the doers, the individuals that actually are there to perform, that are working hard to perform, then they're really missing a key trick.
Yeah.
Because quite simply, in my view, the default is always just to perform at a satisfactory level. And the challenge is, how do you lift that and motivate people to perform, brilliantly every day?
But to what this might be a hugely unfair question, but to what extent is that just naturally easier because of the type of work that you do and that you bring your people in to do? Is there a natural level of engagement that perhaps some other commercial type organizations wouldn't necessarily achieve?
That's a really great question. And I've actually been asked that a number of times before, because I think there's a bit of a myth just because a charity is a civil society organization and perceived as doing good for a particular disadvantaged group in society, that it's therefore it goes hand in hand and hand in glove, that if that organization has a supremely strong cause and purpose. And it doesn't always work that way. And in actual fact, I think you can see from evidence just looking around all sectors that organizations that have a really strong purpose, be that commercial or societal, and where those organizations really connect that to the work that people do, and the people are engaged and motivated to deliver that work, it doesn't really matter what sector you're in. They will perform well. And that's the challenge, is actually how do you ensure that you have a common purpose that people can align behind, and most importantly, that the people you have are motivated to really work hard and engage and perform brilliantly. And that's the same, I think, in my view, across any industry.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's that real kind of strong connection to purpose is what drives that engagement, right? Almost regardless of the purpose. So is there anything that you're particularly doing to sort of keep people really well engaged and do that connection to your purpose? Is there any sort of initiative you have across the organization that are having a meaningful impact on that?
Yeah, I mean, he's in CAF in particular. So from my perspective, the most important bit when I stepped in was to actually have internal comms brought into the people space.
Okay. Yep.
So it actually, from my perspective, I was very fortunate that in coming in, I was able to influence internal comms moving from what was then effectively external affairs within marketing into the world, the people space. And what that meant was that right at the heart of the people agenda was the storytelling, the narrative, the beating heart, the rhythm of comms, the tone and feel. And so what that enabled my role to lead was actually the actual colour of the comms, and what I said, and others in the exec team, of course, but what I said was authentically reflected in our comms.
Yeah.
And so we created a campaign really from 2021 onwards that really, if you were working in the organisation, it was hard to avoid. Regularly being brought into conversations across a whole host of channels, whether that was online or in person, through our hybrid working or whatever. But it was really hard and difficult to actually not be engaged in the questions and conversations about why we exist, the part we all play and every individual plays in supporting the purpose behind why we exist. And actually staying up to date with, where we were succeeding and where we were not doing brilliantly. And it was amazing how over the course of sort of 24 to 36 months, we really got traction with, effectively from my perspective, super high levels of employee engagement, participation, people sharing their voices in ways that, they didn't do most likely before the COVID, for example, as an example, as a case. And what that resulted in really was that individuals bought into, okay, I understand where we're going. I understand the part I play in it, and I'm engaged and motivated to do my best in my everyday to do that. And, the results speak for themselves, I think, here at the
And how are you measuring it though, David? What is the kind of success criteria for you? Because there's one thing around, what does your engagement survey say? But are there other ways that you might measure? or is the engagement survey a critical factor for you?
Well, the engagement in surveys is important because that clearly gives you an indication of the interest and motivation and engagement levels of the organisation. So, our surveys typically always have at least 80% plus engagement. And we've got a workforce in the UK of about 650, 135, 40 in the US and Canada. And so we measure, employee net promoter scores, for example, and we're all, and we've shifted quite significantly upwards up the scale into sort of mid-range positives. What I would say is perhaps the biggest indicator of success is the amount of money we've been able to get in and then distribute out to charities around the world. And so if you take as a really clear indicator, if you go back to 2020, the organisation distributed about £650 million to charities around the world. As this last financial year, we distributed about 1.6 billion.
Wow.
So you see that shift, in many ways, nearly threefold. But, the context is that we've worked hard with our people out there finding organisations and high net worth individuals who want to donate money to good causes. And then we've got a brilliant team who are really motivated to go out there and find charities and distribute that money to them on behalf of the people who give it to us. And, quite simply, we've distributed that 1.6 billion to about 140,000 charities, 120 countries, something like that, So it's, that as a singular measure is perhaps the most impactful measure of all of our reach and impact.
Yeah. And again, if you make that correlation across to a commercial or more commercial type organization, that's just our engagement is demonstrated through our business performance. It's the same story, right? That's what you're experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we set about doing 5 years ago was, I joke about it some way, but my CEO basically turned around and said, David, you're the chief people officer in the organisation. Let's talk about performance objectives. I mean, okay, right. So I've got pen already, and it was just one, and it was build a winning team. That was it.
Yeah.
And I kind of went, what am I going to do with that? Who's that? What do I do with that? Yeah. Build a winning team. But actually, I went away, and when you start to break it down, what became clear to me was the first thing that I needed to influence and lead on was the building and creation of a really healthy workplace. So this is the year after COVID.
Yeah.
So how do you set about creating a great and safe place to work? And great and safe place to work, meaning not just physically, but psychologically. And so we set about, we built a people strategy that's now in its third phase. And that strategy essentially set it up. Part one was engaging with our workforce and building from the inside out the foundations and the shape of a healthy, great and safe place to work, both physically in our workplaces in the UK and North America, and also virtually through our hybrid working and our remote working. And quite simply, that process played its part that resulted in our ability to nearly triple our distributions out to charities over sort of 4.5, 5 years.
And it's interesting because one of our typical questions is kind of what you think your CEO expects from you, or if you want to keep it more generic, what a CEO expects of a CPO more broadly. But I wonder, sort of beyond that one objective, appreciating that's kind of encompassing quite a lot of things. What about sort of cross-functionally? What about around that C-suite table? What do you think your CEO? What role do you think they want you to play around that table in that exec?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I guess I would be seen as a seasoned chief people officer. I'm being kind to myself there, but I guess I'd be seen as a seasoned and mature chief people officer. And what comes with that, of course, is what I hope would be an ability to spot talent, but know that talent alone especially at the leadership, senior leadership level, doesn't cut it. What you've got to do is create an environment in which that talent can practice every day and develop and nurture itself, and, for the benefit of the organisation. And I think with, the CEO, expected me to play my part in being part of the glue around that exec table. And, we've seen some individuals grow and go, and we've seen some individuals play their part and then make their own decision to pass the torch on, for the next part of the relay race, all part of a healthy flow, around our senior leadership table. And a key part of that has been actually designing and building the plan, the talent development and the succession plan.
Yeah.
So the organisation did not have a talent mapping process. It doesn't mean there wasn't talent in it, because there was some brilliant talent in it. Yeah, but there was no mechanism by which talent, particularly leadership talent, could be identified, developed, calibrated around the organisation and then invested in. And I think we've been able to demonstrate that at the senior leadership level, and particularly into the exec team, where half the exec team have come from within and stepped into roles. The other half have come from without, externally. And so I think that's brought a really good balance, to the team.
And let's talk a bit about the different kind of personas or segments you've got in the workforce, because as we said at the beginning, you're a mesh of charity banking, global philanthropy, and I guess that kind of brings some complexity to the CPO, but also, a requirement to delicately balance some different workforce personas in terms of what they want, what they need, how your value proposition has to speak to different types of employees. Talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah. Well, that absolutely, for Charities Aid Foundation, has been one of the really interesting and, I would say, exciting dimensions of the work that we do in the people space, because that question of how do we tailor and build a great and safe organisation across different sectors, but in a way that completes successfully the mosaic of the organisation. Because you wouldn't naturally think, I know what we're going to do today. We're going to design an organisation that essentially is a philanthropic, not-for-profit organisation in North America, covering Canada and America. Connect it with a not-for-profit charity in the charitable foundation in the UK. And what we'll also do is we'll then go and service the retail banking provision for charities in the UK and financial investments for charities in the UK. You go, why would you spread yourself across those different territories and dynamics? But actually, it does go together. And I think it took me a year probably to get my head around it, actually, David. But I think that the fact is that what the foundation does really well is it creates a vehicle through which it is safe for people and organisations in the UK who genuinely want to give money to great causes to be able to do that safely, knowing that the money they give can be trusted to reach the destination it needs to get to. And they know that the charities they're giving to are checked out as well. They're verified. They're genuine charities. But also the charities who we serve and support also know that the money that we are, the donation, the money that we are distributing to them is also coming from a really safe source. What we then also have is, within the UK, how do you enable charities to operate and bank and work with money in an environment where commercially they're seen as high risk to your normal everyday retail banks? And that is one of the challenges that our UK subsidiary CAF Bank meets, and it meets it brilliantly. And then the UK Foundation does what it does brilliantly. And the North American entities do what they do brilliantly. And it's, I guess what I describe it is that you can have different sectors. The art is having a common purpose that you all align behind. And the common purpose, whether you're in the US, in the for-profit banking subsidiary in the UK, or the foundations of the UK, that we're all wanting to fuel civil society. We're wanting to give charities around the world the fuel and money to be able to do their brilliant work and to do that safely. And that's the mosaic of entities in the CAF family. And they all have a part to play, but we are all aligned behind that one singular common purpose. And I think once you're in the organisation, you understand that it doesn't matter which part you work in, you align behind it.
Yeah. And so then in terms of, so you can see how the different people in those different roles can kind of connect into that purpose. Do you have to segment out sort of the work that you do, the way you communicate, the offering that you have according to those different needs, or is the purpose enough to bring all of that together?
Yeah, I mean, there's a common purpose and there's a singularity of purpose. However, I think we also do, we have to be clear. We have to recognise that the foundation charity is regulated by the Charity Commission. The bank is regulated by the PRA.
Yeah.
And we also have the FCA in the middle between both the bank and charity as well. So each entity has its own regulatory parameters that it has to fall behind. And I think as well, and the same in the US, with the IRS and the CRA, the Canadian Revenue Authority also, we have to be really clear that each entity basically has its own strategy, has its own unique identity, its own strategy, usually its own regulator. But separate to that, what we do is we come together and cohere behind our common purpose of basically getting as much bona fide money as possible to charities around the world so they can do their brilliant work and make the world a better place.
It's interesting. It's really interesting. And then I guess in terms of sort of more broadly, where do you think AI is going to hit you, your function, your team, your organisation? How do you think that will change the way that you start to operate?
Yeah, I mean, it already has. So it's, I'm a real fan of demystifying and taking the myth out of, AI and technology. I mean, quite simply, we've been working with technology for decades. AI in the context of the latest iteration and its continued evolution is huge. However, we can get dazzled by the narrative and dazzled by the starry, bright, shiny lights of AI and the social narrative. Quite simply, what we do is we create an organisation environment in which we have highly talented people who practice their craft every day, so they get brilliant at it. And we work hard at creating a brilliant environment that they can deliver their work in. And to do that, we have to give them the best tools and the best conditions in which to use those tools. So what we have done here in our people strategy, we're now in year one of this third phase, third phase, 2-year timeline plan, is bringing together the world of people and our culture. Think of culture as our way of work, our ways of working, and technology. So it's, in simple speak, what we've done is we're moved fully to be a Microsoft Dynamics house, and therefore enabling the Microsoft Dynamics tool set called Modern Workplace. And that has AI enabled applications in it. So think of your email, Outlook, think of your, Word documentation, your worksheets through Excel, etc. All of those are AI enabled, and you can use a central data core. And what we need to do, quite simply, and are doing, is skilling up our people to be able to use those tools as effectively. And that's the challenge, is if you take away the bright, shiny, dazzling effect of what is explained in the manual, on the sales brochure, the most important bit is actually, are those tools worth using for the type of work we do? And if they are, how do we make sure that people can use them fully? So that's what we call, that's our digital upskilling project, basically, over the next 2 years. The challenge there, more than anything, is that everybody's got to participate.
Yeah.
You can't have part of your workforce leaning into it saying, I'm really excited about this, doing it. And then you have part of your workforce saying, actually, hold on, I'm scared and fearful. I'm not going to do it. Because if you do that, you will quite simply create a 2-tier workforce, those that can and those that can't.
Yeah.
You could say those that will and those that
Those
will
that
not.
won't,
But let's just
yeah.
say those that have the ability and those that don't.
Yeah.
And so you've got to work really hard at creating an environment and motivate people to want to learn and want to skill up. And then you start to dive deeper into that, which is, okay, what we've then got to do is, what's the stuff we stop using so we can use the new stuff or the next version of it? And I think that's probably one of the big things I've learned this past year in personal experience in doing the doing, is that if you don't turn off and stop using some of the stuff you were using, you end up overloading people even more, because what you can find is people move from using 12 applications to 20.
Yeah. Still using the old ones.
You've got to clear the road of the stuff that you're not going to use, and then help people pick up and learn how to use the stuff they will use.
Yeah.
So for me, I find that I'm fascinated by it, because it goes to the heart of how do you motivate and engage with people so that they want to learn.
Yeah.
And
there's a lot about sort of talking to people about the benefits of it, right? Which at the moment I think we typically see a fear that it's going to take my job away, as opposed to the benefit of it'll take away the handle turning stuff that I don't really enjoy anyway, and free me up to do different value added, developmental, exciting, more engaging work. And that's some of the very baseline opportunity. We met some CPOs last week, and some of the conversation we were having with them is about how you make that transition from AI sitting alongside you to actually becoming a really integral part of the way in which the organization works. And we talk about it sometimes as, AI becomes your teammate, for example, and there's a radical change needed in terms of thinking about what it could actually do to contribute to the work, rather than just most organizations really comfortable now with Copilot, for example, and asking Copilot to do things that help you to hurry up or to be more efficient. But how do we take it to that next step, I guess, is the challenge.
Yes, I mean, I guess I come back to probably a common theme that I mentioned already, which is, how do you bring the AI experience into your everyday and the everyday life of your people, and that means actually giving people the tools, allowing them to use it. Also promote individuals who go out and learn and perhaps are using personal AI tools, and then they're bringing that experience back into the workplace. So how do you use things like Viva Engage and tools that we've got that promote forums and discussion forums and learning?
Yeah.
And I think the reason why that's really helpful is because it promotes a positive conversation around your workforce amongst people of good experiences they're having.
Yeah.
And it's amazing then, from my experience here over the past year, how people of all types of roles, all backgrounds, all demographies, all ages come back into the workplace and tell you how they've used it in their life and how they're now using it in their work life. And I think, for me, it's bringing the experience of using the technology to life.
Yeah.
That is how, when we think of those three themes of people, culture and technology, build your people strategy around converging those three things together, because they are really inextricably connected.
Yeah.
The more an organization keeps technology as a separate pillar, the more it will continue to be seen in some organizations as disconnected or something to fear, as opposed to actually, hold on, it's about the tools we use to do our work.
Yeah.
And it can be a friend or it can be an enemy.
Yeah.
And quite simply, you find a way and uses for these tools and this technology in a way that can help you do your work. And you do that by bringing it into your everyday. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And our learning strategies about that as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You referred to yourself earlier as seasoned, and I'd put myself in a similar category. We've been through this before, right? So when they introduced email or Excel, suddenly in Excel we weren't required to do the books in the same way anymore. So there is that sort of, we mustn't forget that it's all part of an evolution of the way in which people work. It's not it might be more of a revolution, but we're going through these changes all the time about how we actually do the work. I think we're close to the end of time, David. I think what I'd be really interested to just explore briefly is more generically around sort of the CPO role is if you could change one thing, or what do you think is your biggest frustration about how you see the CPO role playing out in other organizations, or your frustrations around how people talk about the CPO role, for example? Where do you think we're not quite getting it right?
Well, I'll answer that probably in two levels. I mean, the first level is in the micro organization level. I think if you're a chief people officer, right, the front and center first purpose of your role is to create a really healthy organization for your people to work in. And that actually means that you're both a creator, a designer of that organization, but you're also a champion of it. So you have to have a voice, and you have to be strong and courageous as well to use your voice and say, actually, hold on, this isn't healthy, or that this isn't right, this is wrong. It's not going to promote a safe place to work, or it's not going to promote a really great place to work. So I think there's an obligation, I think, in a micro level in an organization for the CPO to be a proper champion and not be seen. I think in a number of organizations I can think of, or colleagues that I've worked with and in my network, they're in the exec team or in the senior leadership community, but they're not necessarily one of the key influencers. They're one of them, but they're not key, major. And I think you've got to be a major influencer and a champion for creating that healthy organization. I then think if you step back and think of the macro world, level, then I think there's a piece here about really making sure that the world of people remains at the forefront of delivering in society the services and the economic, if you like, the economic machine of our society. And I think that, as a CPO, it's important that we keep the flag flying for our wonderful workforces. And even no matter how we connect with technology, it is the most valuable part of our society is our humanity and the people who step up every day to do good, deliver their work, keep our society and our economy thriving. And that sometimes seems quite a challenge in this day and age, but it is so, so important. So for me, CPO is, one of the most amazing roles to be in. And it's also a role with perhaps one of the most significant responsibilities in the context of, our workforces.
Thank you, David, so much for your contribution to today's podcast. It's been really interesting to hear some of your experiences and where there are some similarities and also some differences between your organisation and some of the other types of organisation that we talked to on this podcast. I think being a CPO isn't just about people. You've talked today a lot about sort of the contribution that how you shape the people agenda really shapes the future of the business and how the business operates and how it succeeds. So thank you for joining us. I'm Debbie Mitchell. I've been your host for today. Thank you for listening. And remember, we'll be back with more stories from CPOs to hear about their experiences on the What is a CPO sub-series of the People Agenda podcast at Lace Partners. Thank you so much.